Emergency podcast. Deebo Samuel has not signed, agreed to a new 3-year contract with the San Francisco 49ers. We'll see how quickly the ink dries on that, how quickly Deebo Samuel gets to practice, maybe even makes an appearance in the preseason games. But a deal, according to all reports, has been agreed to. We'll get into the specifics of it. Deebo Samuel staying a 49er coming up right now.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you once again at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. Thanks for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And Croc, the games are going to start with Deebo Samuel on the 49ers. Number 19 has agreed to a contract as reported by multiple outlets, but got to go to the first source. That was Ian Rappaport. He says the 49ers and star weapon Deebo Samuel are in agreement on a massive contract extension, keeping him in San Francisco for the foreseeable future. The drama is over. The bridge is rebuilt. It's a 3-year extension worth up to $73.5 million, sources say, with $58.1 million guaranteed. Deebo Samuel and the 49ers figured it out, as we knew they would, and it's a done deal. And they got it in just before the beginning of August. So no harm, no foul, right? He's done. It's a done deal. Let's go. Deebo Samuel.
I'm surprised he wasn't petty and requested that he gets a little bit more than DK Metcalf as far as the guaranteed money. So DK Metcalf, his guaranteed money came in at 58.2, Deebo 58.1.
He got slightly less than DK Metcalf. So those deals must have been figured out at the same time. Same agent as well, right? Same receivers drafted in the same season. Deebo had the best season last year, but when you look at the entirety of their NFL 3-year careers, DK Metcalf was a little bit better. So I think that's where that came from. And I'm surprised that even though Deebo agreed last, that he got a little bit less. I thought the guy that signed last would get the most, and it turned out not to be the case. He got just almost identical deals, but just a little bit less than DK Metcalf. And for
his overall money could be a little bit more, but we know the most important thing is the guaranteed money.
Like the guarantees,
that's it. And they got more than AJ Brown, and they got more than Terry McLaurin as well. So AJ Brown, his guaranteed money, I know his contract looks way larger. He has all these void years and things like that, and we'll see if the 49ers do anything like that. But AJ Brown's guaranteed money was a little bit less than $57 million. So
AJ Brown's 4-year extension, the 4th year, I'm not sure he's going to see it. It's a bigger dollar amount, and I could pull it up. But speaking of AJ Brown, he as soon as this deal was mentioned, he said on Twitter, quote, "Basically all 4 of us got the same contract, and I'm the one that got traded. Yeah, keep believing it was me. Anywho, go Birds. #carry on." So, AJ Brown throwing a little shade at the Titans because they couldn't get a deal done that all the other teams got done with the receivers that were all done by the same agent.
Yeah, and a lot of people thought, like, how would that work out, right? When you have kind of the same agent, but you're representing other people. Like, I know my experience having an agent, he didn't really want to represent like too many defensive backs because it can at some point be a conflict of interest, especially when you're talking about more like, small guys, right? Like myself, undrafted, and a lot of his other guys undrafted. So, he needs to get all of his workouts. That could be a little difficult. I think it's the same when even you have the big name guys.
Yeah, one player, like if it's like end of the roster guys, all these guys want the same tryout. And if you give a tryout to one guy instead of another, that's difficult. On this end of it, it's like the opposite, where you're trying to get everybody the maximum amount of money. I wonder if Deebo gets mad because DK, every time he sees DK's like, oh, I got a little bit more money. I got 0.1 more guaranteed than you did.
Well, I think if I'm Deebo, I just flip it and say, well, I got more money overall. Right, so if he plays out the life of his contract, he actually earns A little bit more. I think it can be up to like 1.5 million more than DK Metcalf.
Yeah, DK's is 72 million, which is 24 per year, and Deebo's can be 73 and a half, I think, up to.
Now
It's
it
only
says so.
71 and
So
a
what's
half.
that?
I don't know. So
Right.
we're gonna have to see, because the way I haven't seen all the details, but the way it's been worded, it was 71 something, which is a little less than DK, but up to max 73 and a half. So there's got to be some extra little bonus in there. And I wonder if that's the carry. I wonder if there's a certain amount of carries and he's getting bonus for that. I wonder if that's worked into the contract.
How many carries do you think that is? I mean, it's because I'm well. Again, gotta look at the big picture here, and maybe he's just like, you know what? I just need to hit. I hit big. I got a bunch of money. My life has changed forever. My kid, his life changed forever. Everything is great. But gosh, can I get a third bit? Can I get a third contract? Can I get like two big contracts? And I want to be able to, play and not be all banged up by the time I reach 30 years old, because we talked about it. He is a little bit older of a prospect coming out of college. And between him and Terry McLaurin, both guys, they turned 27 years old during this season. And you look at guys like AJ Brown and DK Metcalf, it's like those dudes are 24 years old, so they are younger. I don't know. Do you sacrifice making a little bit extra money and put your body in a little bit more harm's way to where you can get beat up with more carries, or do you say no? I don't want those carries. I'll lose out on 1.5 million if that means that I am better physically to make another $20+ million a year contract at the age of 30.
And I think that's why it ended up being a 3-year deal in the end, because as we heard from Brad Spielberger of PFF and formerly of overthecap.com, he's really good with this stuff, the 49ers. And, he's correct. When you look back at all the deals the 49ers have done, they like to do longer deals, 5, even 6-year extensions. And so I wonder if all of this time the 49ers were aiming for a longer extension, more of a 4 or 5-year deal, closer to like the AJ Brown contract. And Deebo wanted a shorter one because he wants to get to free agency again sooner while he's still healthy to cash in again, which is, I would understand that from Deebo's side. So that's interesting that the Niners went to 3 years, because they never have before. And as Brad Spielberger said, Brad PFF, Brad underscore PFF. I can't remember what it is on Twitter. But I did read a tweet from him. I'm not looking at it right now, but basically he said this is a win for future players that want shorter deals, because the 49ers haven't gone to shorter deals yet. So I got to believe that's one of the hangups with this Deebo deal and why maybe it didn't get done sooner. And it ended up being just basically the same deal that DK Metcalf signed. I got a whole bunch of stats just to drive it home. We already know how good Deebo Samuel is, but I got some more stats to drive home exactly how good he is in a little bit. But just from a like a team vibe perspective, Croc, does this feel like a big moment for the 49ers for this offseason to be like, okay, now we got Deebo in? And like, because the offense has been getting beat in training camp practices every day. Deebo shows up, pads go on. If Deebo, he's not going to show up at practice, I think Monday probably, but at some point he's been doing conditioning on the side. He could probably jump into practice pretty quickly. It might not be day one, but when Deebo shows up to practice, maybe the offense starts to win a little bit. I think this is a big tide change in training camp. Pads go on, helps the offensive line a little bit more. You get Deebo on the field a little bit, and maybe the offense can strike back on the defense at the second half of camp.
We've talked about it. I've mentioned it. Matter of fact, I got a little backup here too. So I've talked about this whole time. The defense typically starts faster than the offense, right? I've been saying that since day one of training camp. Well, got a little backup. I see Richard Sherman out there. He comments on it, and he says the same thing. Defense typically starts faster than the offense. Then I'm watching NFL Network, and you got O'Hara. Can't think of his first name, but former
Sean.
NFL. Yeah. Offensive lineman for the New York Giants.
Mm-hmm.
And he says defense typically starts faster than the offense. I'm like, okay, it makes sense. Now I think you're getting Deebo back at the perfect time, whenever it is that he does practice, but you get the pads on, you get him back. The offense starts to gel a little bit and, kind of build that camaraderie. Now you have your offensive linemen starting to come back and get more reps. I don't think Trent Williams and Mike McGlinchey got all the reps in that first practice, but they got some. And from my understanding, when they were in there and the blocking was good, Trey Lance, he was firing all cylinders and looked good. When they weren't in there, things got a little sketchy, right? So you're getting back some guys that can definitely at least make the aesthetics of practice look more functional.
That's a pretty big deal too. Getting Deebo and Trent Williams back potentially at the same time in practice. Like
Wow, and Mike
defense
McGlinchey.
feeling
Don't forget about Big Mike.
and Big Mike McGlinchey, yeah. Big Slim and Fred Warner and Charvarius Ward, they're having a good time, chuckling, laughing, stretching, getting ready for practice, getting ready to dominate another day at practice. And all of a sudden they look down and it's like the movie scene. It's like slow motion. You see walk out of the tunnel. It's Deebo and Trent Williams right next to each other. Maybe even they got a boom box with them or something like that. And the defense might gulp a little bit, might say, okay, it's good. It's going to be a little bit more difficult practice than it was yesterday or last week. So I think it's important. I mean, it's obviously important for the 49ers. Deebo Samuel was the 49ers MVP last year. I think that's clear.
Right.
We got some stats that I want to break out just to drive home how good Deebo Samuel was for the 49ers last year. Some more final thoughts here on this emergency podcast. Deebo Samuel agreeing with the San Francisco 49ers on a 3-year extension worth up to over $73 million. We'll get to more of the details there next. But how about, we're talking about $73 million, but some of you guys might only need $500. And hindsight is 2020. You can't change the past, but what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash, right? So now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill up your tank, buy a wedding gift, catch up on bills, finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest, no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get that financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch, need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand for future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's Dave, D-A-V-E. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. And by the way, I think there's probably some lines popping up for Deebo Samuel's season-long statistics now that he has signed and now that the books know that Deebo Samuel is going to be back with the 49ers. You can bet on the 49ers to win the Super Bowl. You can bet on the sacks for Nick Bosa, over under 12 sacks. Take the over there. You can bet on win totals, Super Bowl champion, coach of the year, whatever you want. Tons of lines and odds already up for the 2022 season at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf, live in-game betting as well. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your not only sports wagering, but information as well. So get over to BetOnline today. Use your desktop or mobile device to learn more about the action happening right now at BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, Croc. Deebo Samuel. Speaking of $500, I bet some of his buddies are hitting him up right now and say, yo, hey, Deebo, remember that time I gave you some money about a slice of pizza that one time? Can I get a loan?
That's a lot of money, man. 58 million guaranteed.
Yeah, 58.
How much of that does he get up front? I bet the signing bonus is crazy.
So the signing bonus for DK, I believe, was around $30 million or total first year plus signing bonus was the total cash payout was $31 million. You know what's funny? So DK's contract, it did affect this year's salary cap in 2022, but the extension doesn't kick in until 2023. So just betting on, this money being very similar, being the same agent, that Deebo's contract looks a lot like DK Metcalf's contract. The 49ers were, I think, $4.5 million under the cap. It might absorb a little bit of that, but they were able to fit it in, even with Jimmy Garoppolo on the books, unless, who knows, maybe there's a Jimmy Garoppolo deal coming as well. But DK Metcalf's 2022 salary did go up a little bit, and it increased his cap number a little bit. But, the money really started to kick in in 2023, 2024, 2025, 3-year contract. And those cap numbers are $8 million this year for DK Metcalf. Next year, 13.7. Then it really jumps up in 2024 to $24.5 million, and then $29.5 million on the 2025 cap, year 3 of that contract, with prorated bonuses of 7 something million of it this year, then 11.5 million the other 3 years of the deal. So we'll see how it's structured, but I would imagine it's not all that far off for Deebo Samuel's contract.
You know whose name is trending right now? Deontay Johnson. Not to be confused with 49er Dante Johnson, but Deontay Johnson. And we got to remember, a lot of those guys from that class, they're getting paid now, right? A.J. Brown, he's been paid. DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin. And now Deontay Johnson, he's kind of the forgotten guy out of that class. But he's like, wait a minute. I was a 3rd-round pick. Where's my money at? And last year, he had the most receptions out of all those guys, 107 receptions, 1,161 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's got to be thinking like, okay, well, what about my payday? Where am I at? So I'm assuming that's why he's trending right now. Deebo getting signed was kind of like, all right, where do I fall into all this with my money?
And it seems like with the Steelers drafting 2 wide receivers, they got Chase Claypool as well. They're not planning on spending a bunch of money wide receiver. I think Deontay Johnson might get his money on another team. And that's going to be a really interesting one for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Deontay was drafted 2 picks after DK Metcalf too, at the top of the 3rd round, right? 2 or 3 picks later.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, he was the pick right before Jalen Hurd.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, Jalen Hurd. Does that hurt to bring him up right now in all this?
Oh man, it's injuries. And
I mean,
we had a whole podcast that we recorded and we talked about some of these things.
Yeah.
Are you still putting it out? We're not putting that out, huh?
Which one? Oh, the yesterday's podcast or today's podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to put it out still. This is going to be the emergency pod. By the way, yeah, so this is the second podcast we recorded today. We already recorded Monday's podcast. Then after we were done recording, the Deebo Samuel news came out. So we had to record this emergency podcast. The emergency podcast is going up as an extra pod. We're still going to have the normally scheduled Monday pod popping up Monday morning that we talked about everything else. But,
all right.
So yeah,
okay,
it's still going to happen.
So they would have heard when we talked about the defensive tackle who's got hurt, blanking on his name right now.
Maurice Hurst. Yeah, Maurice Hurst.
Yeah, Maurice Hurst. I want to call him Hurst. I don't know, name's thrown off. But anyways, Hurst, another guy who talented, but just the injuries and it just kind of robbed him of what could be a potentially good career. And Jalen Hurd, I mean, that was the ultimate robbery. It still kind of hurts because gosh, we don't even know, right? Like we have no idea what it would have been. That's got to be even more frustrating than even a guy like Mo Hurst who got to play in games. I mean, Hurd, it was like, hey, man, I come in here, 2 touchdowns on 3 catches, look dominant, and you will never see me ever again on the field.
Right. And for Maurice Hurst, he already was drafted by another team and then ended up with the 49ers. And we've seen him on the field. We know he's a good player. But with Hurd, there's just so much unknown. You saw 2 big plays in a preseason game, and that was it. So you're just left to dream about what Jalen Hurd could have been with the 49ers.
6'4", 230-pound receiver.
What a crazy draft year for wide receivers. How about this one? So from Ari Meroff of PFF, My Sports Update on Twitter, he broke it down here. 11 receivers have signed deals worth $20 million or more per year this offseason. 20 mil per year, 11 wide receivers. And wide receiver has been a position that didn't get as much money as some of the premier positions around the league. That has changed. That's over. Wide receiver is the premier position now, on par with corners, defensive ends, offensive tackles, and then just behind, of course, quarterbacks is in another stratosphere.
Again, if you're the 49ers, you got to pay Deebo Samuel, right? Because 49ers just haven't had great luck, I guess, drafting receivers and getting this type of production. But some of these other teams, I'm a little shocked that they're not going a little bit more the draft route as opposed to just paying the guy a bunch of money, because receivers, we see them coming into the league, and if you throw enough resources at that position, one of those guys will be really good. One of those guys will be very productive. So Knowing that, I'm surprised at the amount of guys that are getting paid 20 plus million, and that's not going to stop. But the crazy thing is, everybody's saying, hey, these receivers are coming in from college and they're hitting the ground running, they're productive, they're doing their thing. 2 years in, we're talking about guys who are like Pro Bowl type receivers. And I don't know what the balance is. Like, you want to, obviously, you want to keep good guys on your team, but let's say if you're Minnesota Vikings and maybe it's luck, maybe, but you drafted Thielen or you signed Thielen. I think he might have even been undrafted. He ended up being really good. Then you're like, you know what? Let's draft this other guy in like the 5th round, Stephon Diggs. He balls out. Then he's like, I don't really want to play with this quarterback that you have here. So okay, we trade him away. Then it's like, oh, we drafted Justin Jefferson. He balls out, and it's like, can you keep doing that? Like, can you keep getting guys undrafted, all that without having to pay guys a bunch of money? So I am a little surprised that people might not go the Moneyball route, right? Moneyball from Oakland A's. And they're like, no, we're just going to pay these guys a boatload of money.
It's crazy because wide receivers are getting paid more and more money, but there's more and more needed, but there's more and more talent coming in the league every year. So it's hard to really figure out the economy of where wide receivers are. And we are seeing some teams go that route. We saw the Tennessee Titans go that route. They basically swapped A.J. Brown for a rookie in Treylon Burks with a first-round pick. And they said, we're going to recycle him. We're going to go with a wide receiver. They drafted, who was it? Kyle Phillips, I believe, too, right? In the 4th, 5th round, something like that. And I think he could be a little player in a slot type of a role for the Titans. And I think we might see the Steelers go that route. They just drafted 2 wide receivers. Steelers smart, though, doing it a year before and not the year where it's harder for a rookie to jump in. So George Pickens and Calvin Austin, we'll see what those guys look like for the Pittsburgh Steelers if they end up moving on from either, or maybe it was just more of a factor of them knowing they can't pay both Claypool and Deontay Johnson, and they're going to have to get rid of one of them at some point. Maybe they'll end up paying Deontay Johnson. We'll find out. But yeah, it's fascinating, and we'll see, because I don't think everyone sees eye to eye on the wide receiver value around the league. Clearly, they don't. So,
clearly, Tennessee Titans don't, because they said, look, we'll draft a guy first round, which that's a whole nother thing. It's like, okay, you trade A.J. Brown away because you don't want to pay him. It was like real disrespectful, like $16 million a year, which I understand from the value standpoint of like, hey, we can draft another receiver or sign receivers or et cetera. But you're like, you know what, I'm not going to do that. But then you go and spend a first-round pick on a receiver. So I don't know if it's just solely for the 5th-year option or what. And I would have liked them, if it's me, I want to double up, just because I feel like if one doesn't work out, for sure the other one would.
And the 49ers, I think, maybe try to do that, right?
They definitely tried
Brandon Ayuk. And I think, I don't know if they're not going to be able to pay both. If Brandon Ayuk goes crazy, has a year 3 like Deebo has, they got to trade him. They can't sign Ayuk now that they've signed Deebo, right? And maybe the plan was, well, we're going to maybe sign Ayuk and not Deebo before, but that can't happen now. And maybe they were disappointed with Ayuk in a way that they could have walked away from Deebo Samuel. Maybe they could have traded him if they thought Ayuk was going to be that wide receiver one, but he started in the doghouse last year. And it's in theory, it's a good idea, but when you've got a player who's so good, you just want to keep that guy in your roster, and you just want to pay him. And the Niners are now paying a lot of star players, Trent Williams and Fred Warner and George Kittle. Can they pay Emmanuel Mosley next year, which is one of the topics we talked about on Monday's podcast that we recorded earlier? Can they pay Mike McGlinchey? So at some point you can't pay everybody. So some of these guys that the 49ers are now developing, because their team is pretty good, they're going to have to let walk.
I have a question. So what's more difficult, or what's more difficult? What do you believe is more difficult? Having a player be Trent Williams, or even like a McGlinchey, or being able to manufacture touches / production for a receiver?
That's tough, because I think Kyle Shanahan is really good at manufacturing touches for players. And we've seen it with a lot of players. We've seen it with the running back production. We've seen it with receiver production, but it hasn't been that easy at wide receiver. I think we're learning that you can't really fake it at wide receiver that much. You can't really fake it on the lines either. So you got to have a real player there. But the 49ers have been able to find whether they drafted and developed some guys, or if it was the Trent Williams style player, or it was Alex Mack, like they've been able to bring guys in. Like Trent Williams was a bargain deal. They paid him a lot of money, but the trade part of it was a bargain deal. You can find those players, and even wide receivers you can find. But that's where I think the difference is to me is if you wanted AJ Brown, you could have just traded a first rounder for him and got him this offseason. You could do that. You could do it before with Stephon Diggs. You could do it, almost in a year. You can go, if you need a wide receiver, you can go get one. If you need a linebacker, you can go get one. If you need an offensive lineman, you can go get one. Even if it's a left tackle, even if it's the best left tackle in the league, right? You can get that. It's not that easy, but you can get it. You can't go get that. Even defensive ends, you can kind of get. We saw some guys move teams, not
often though.
But not often. It's harder to do. And they're at the back end of their career, with quarterbacks, it's guys that the other teams are ready to move on. They're on the other side of 30. Deshaun Watson's its own other deal. So I think that's where I would rate the positions when you're drafting or when you're spending free agent money. How easy is it to acquire? And I think wide receivers are still easier to acquire than those other positions because you can draft them and there's so many available every year. You can find a star in the second round. If you're finding a star at quarterback or defensive end or offensive tackle, you got to go first round almost every time. And you don't have to do that with wide receiver. There's more out there. There's more available. So I still think that in some ways, if I was writing I'm a new GM manifesto, I would definitely have wide receivers down the list. And I might go. I could understand the Tennessee Titans route there. I could understand going that route. It's a lot easier if you already have a guy, though. But just letting go of a dynamic wide receiver that means so much to your team and you don't have somebody else already there, that gets pretty difficult. So I'm fascinated to watch how this goes with wide receivers and what they're paid in the future.
I do think, and you talked about kind of replacing receivers. I think typically I'd agree with that, and that's kind of my philosophy on how I see it. I continue to just throw resources at them. Again, I love the way that Pittsburgh Steelers are kind of setting themselves up and putting themselves in position to be like, look, we've been drafting receivers and spending a lot of resources on these guys, and hey, they are actually panning out. And even then, we're still kind of loading up. I will say Deebo Samuel is a little different because he just did so much for you, and it's like every time he touches the ball, he's kind of a threat. So he's not even. I hate when people say he's not a pure receiver. I'd say he's not your traditional receiver in the sense of all the things that he is able to do at such a high and elite level. So whether it is running a slant, catching it, take it to the house, a dig, catch it, take it to the house, post, whatever. Also being able to turn around, hand it to him, even if he doesn't want to be, running between the tackles, being able to flip that, that orbit motion to him and him get off there. It's something that damn near made him like Super Bowl MVP if the 49ers would have won that. And then, oh, by the way, we could put you back there on kickoff return as well in a pinch when the game is really tight and we need the ball in our best player's hands. So I think for most teams, Deontay Johnson, you might be out of luck if Eric Crocker was your GM. But when this guy like Deebo Samuel, I'm like, I think I got to hold on to this guy no matter what it costs me.
How much can you create on your own? I think Deebo's in a different level than Deontay Johnson. Even though if you look at their numbers, they might look similar enough to where you would think they're equal value or close to it. I think Deebo Samuel's at a different level than someone like Deontay Johnson. As good as Deontay Johnson is, and he's really good. But I might go the Steelers route on him. But the top guys, I think you got to pay them if they are difference makers and they're making offense on their own, which Deebo Samuel did.
I don't know. I don't know if you got to pay them.
Oh, Niners shouldn't have paid Deebo Samuel?
Top guy? Who are you saying? Like,
at Eric _Crocker, the 49ers should not have paid Deebo Samuel, Eric Crocker is saying.
No, I paid Deebo. I'm saying these other guys. Because look at DeAndre Hopkins. Great football player, right? Like when he got traded, he was like top 3 for sure on everybody's list. You trade him away, you end up getting Brandon Cooks in there. He's going over 1,000 yards no matter who the quarterback is. So I'm not saying he's D-Hop. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying in the sense of the production.
Not top 3 anymore. DeAndre Hopkins is still good, right? And now suspended. Some injuries. Start getting a little older. It's a shrewd business, the NFL. So I could see the argument for it, for sure.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Even with some of the top guys, like unless you're like just Julio Jones, who like his whole career was just a unicorn, right? These other guys, it's like all y'all can get traded. Watch, okay. Green Bay Packers. I think that, and I like the team that uh, DeAndre Adams. All these names.
Devontae.
Devontae Adams. These names are all throwing me off right now. Deontay Johnson, Devontae. I'm getting thrown off. But anyways,
Yeah.
Tay Adams. All right. I think that he'll miss playing with Aaron Rodgers more than Aaron Rodgers will miss throwing him the ball.
Yes, I agree. Yep.
I think that Tyreek Hill, and I think he'll still get his, but I'd say him leaving still potentially hurts him more than Kansas City's offense.
Yes, 100% agree.
Deebo is one of the few guys where you could just say him leaving hurt the team more than the actual player.
Deebo Samuel's ranks. This is from Warren Sharp. A couple stats here to drive it home before we go. Deebo Samuel's ranks in 2021. He was 54th in routes run. So he ran the 54th most routes in the NFL, which is almost egregious thinking about it. He was 20. He started becoming a running back in the second half. That's why. He was 26th in targets in the NFL. But even though he ran the 54th most routes and was the 26th most targeted receiver in the NFL, he was 5th in receiving yards. Since Deebo Samuel was drafted in 2019, he ranks number 1 in the NFL in yards after catch. His yards after catch last year was by far the most. 9.8, just under 10 yards per reception after the catch.
It's crazy.
10 yards per catch after the catch for Deebo Samuel last year, which is by far number 1. Like, that's how much offense he's creating on his own. It's pretty amazing. I think he led the league in yards per catch last year. Hold on. I think I got a stat on that. Let's keep going here. Yeah, Deebo Samuel. He led the NFL with 18.2 yards per reception. Over half of those yards per catch were after the catch, by the way. 9.8 of those 18.2 yards per catch. Most of the guys who lead the league in yards per catch, they're downfield guys, right? Like Calvin Johnson.
Jamar Chase.
Yeah, Jamar Chase, Will Fuller, right? The guys that are they're just outside guys, and the targets they get are deep down the field. Deebo Samuel last year, with his air yards, was the leader, 18.2 yards per reception, because he was creating almost 10 yards per catch after the catch last year. Unbelievable. The offense he was creating on his own. 8 rushing touchdowns were the most ever by a wide receiver in NFL history. 8 rushing touchdowns. Only player in NFL history with 1,400 receiving yards and 300 rushing yards in a season. Like that's special what Deebo Samuel did last year.
I want the listeners to go on Twitter tomorrow. I'm going to put the question out here on this show. What receiver leaving their team hurts the team more than Deebo Samuel? Any top receiver. I think most of those teams would say that the team will miss them more. The player will miss the team more, except for Deebo.
Yep. He got almost identical contract as DK Metcalf. Deebo leaving the 49ers hurts the 49ers way more than if DK Metcalf left the Seahawks.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It'd be hard. It'd be hard to find any receiver in the NFL. It's a good question, Croc. Let us know your answer to that question on the comments on YouTube, at BD Peacock on Twitter, at Eric_Crocker. Thanks for listening to this emergency podcast. Deebo Samuel is back. He has signed, or not quite signed, he has agreed to, is where we're at in this process. Maybe he has signed by the time you listen to this show. Deebo Samuel agreed to a 3-year extension with the San Francisco 49ers worth up to $73.5 million. Deebo Samuel sticking around. Croc and I sticking around with you as well daily, as we do here on Locked On 49ers. We won't be back tomorrow, Croc. We'll be back again today with a second podcast. So tune into that and every day right here. Locked On 49ers.